Welcome to the Watershed Moment, the podcast where we explore those pivotal stories, challenges and innovations in water resources engineering.
Mm-hmm.
In this episode, we'll be diving into the PBS documentary Flood in the Desert,
Okay.
which tells the gripping story of the St. Francis Dam disaster in California.
Yeah, it's a story that, despite its, historical context, still has a lot to teach us, I think,
Absolutely.
about the choices we make when it comes to infrastructure and resource management.
For sure, for sure. Whether you're brushing up on your water resources engineering knowledge,
Right.
or simply fascinated by stories where human ambition kind of collides with nature,
Yeah,
this deep dive is for you.
for sure.
So imagine Southern California in the 1920s.
Okay.
Los Angeles is booming,
Uh-huh.
fueled by a seemingly endless supply of water delivered by the LA Aqueduct,
Right.
an engineering marvel of its time.
It really was.
And at the heart of this story is William Mulholland,
Yes.
a self-made engineer who rose to prominence for bringing water to this burgeoning metropolis.
Yeah, his success with the aqueduct completed in 1913 made him a legend.
He was the water wizard,
Yes,
the man who made the desert bloom.
precisely. But that success also perhaps sowed the seeds for the tragedy to come. Because with that success came a sense of invincibility, a belief that nature could be bent to human will. This brings us to the St. Francis Dam, intended to be Mulholland's next triumph.
Okay.
It was meant to hold back a vast reservoir
Right.
that would quench the city's growing thirst.
And it tragically failed, right? What went wrong?
Well, the documentary highlights some critical decisions made during the dam's design and construction.
Okay.
For one, Mulholland raised the dam's height twice during construction without proportionally increasing the base width. Think of it like building a house with taller and taller walls, but keeping the foundation the same size.
Right.
Eventually, it becomes unstable.
That makes sense. Were there any other red flags?
There were warning signs. Cracks appeared in the dam. There were leaks. And the dam keeper, Tony Harnischfeger, voiced his concerns.
Oh, wow.
He even called Mulholland to inspect the dam personally.
So Mulholland was warned but didn't heed these concerns?
Yes, he dismissed them as nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
What's striking is that the documentary really captures that sense of foreboding.
Oh.
In the days leading up to the collapse, Harnischfeger was living right there in the shadow of this massive structure,
Right.
and he could feel something wasn't right.
It's like that classic horror movie trope.
Yes,
The audience knows something terrible's about to happen, but the characters are oblivious.
exactly. And then just hours after Mulholland's inspection in the dead of night on March 12, 1928,
Wow.
the St. Francis Dam crumbled. A wall of water estimated to be over 140 feet high in some places roared down the San Francisco Canyon,
Oh, my God.
wiping out the Powerhouse 2 community,
Right.
where Harnischfeger and his family lived, in an instant. From there, it surged into the Santa Clara River Valley, carrying everything in its path. Houses, bridges, livestock, people.
The documentary really brings to life the chaotic and terrifying nature of the event.
It does.
The desperate scramble for survival. It must have been horrific.
It was. And what makes it even more tragic is that the exact death toll is still unknown.
Really?
Because there were so many migrant workers and families in the valley.
Oh,
Many were never officially accounted for.
wow.
They were lost to history in the most terrible way.
Adding another layer of tragedy to an already horrific situation.
Yes.
This disaster really shines a light on how these types of events disproportionately impact the most vulnerable.
It does. And the documentary does a good job of conveying the sheer scale of the destruction and the national shock that followed.
Yeah.
It gives you a sense of the disbelief and horror that gripped the nation.
Naturally, there were investigations, right,
Yes.
to understand what went wrong and who was responsible.
Yes. The official conclusion pointed to unstable soil beneath the dam
Okay.
as the primary cause of failure. However, some experts dispute this and argue that Mulholland's design choices, particularly raising the dam's height without adequate reinforcement, played a significant role.
So it sounds like it wasn't just the soil that was a problem,
Right.
but the way the dam was designed.
It seems that way. And Mulholland, despite initially defending his work, eventually took responsibility for the disaster.
Wow.
He famously said, "If there is any error in human judgment, I was the human."
What a heavy burden to carry. What does that statement tell us about engineering in that period?
It's a powerful statement that reveals a lot about the mindset of that era. Engineering was viewed with a sense of infallibility.
Right.
Mulholland, at the height of his fame, was given an almost unprecedented level of autonomy.
It's almost unfathomable today that a project of that scale wouldn't have multiple layers of checks and balances.
It really speaks to a different era, a time when engineers, especially prominent figures like Mulholland, were seen as almost mythical figures.
Right.
The St. Francis Dam disaster challenged that notion and ultimately forced a reckoning. Sadly, that reckoning came at a terrible cost.
It seems this event was a wake-up call, a moment when the limits of human control over nature became painfully apparent.
Yeah, it was a turning point. And the weight of that responsibility took a toll on Mulholland. He retired under a cloud of guilt and died a few years later before the completion of Hoover Dam, a project he had championed but would never see finished.
His story does have that element of rise and fall, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But shifting gears a bit, how did this disaster change the way we design and build dams?
Well, the St. Francis Dam disaster led to a major overhaul of dam safety standards.
Right.
For one, it highlighted the critical importance of something we touched on earlier, peer review and independent oversight. We can no longer rely solely on the judgment of one individual, no matter how brilliant.
Right.
There needs to be multiple layers of checks and balances to ensure the soundness of a design.
So having those systems in place is crucial to catching potential errors.
Precisely. The disaster also underscored the need to understand the underlying geology.
Okay.
The type of soil a dam sits on plays a vital role in its stability. Today, thorough site investigations are mandatory, which include analyzing the soil's shear strength.
Shear strength.
Shear strength is essentially the soil's resistance to sliding.
Okay.
If the soil beneath the dam is weak, it can't withstand the immense pressure of the water, potentially leading to failure.
Right.
The St. Francis Dam, unfortunately, was built on a foundation containing a type of soil susceptible to slippage when wet.
Oh, wow.
It's a factor that was not adequately understood at the time.
I see. So advancements in soil mechanics helped improve dam safety. Were there any other important engineering lessons?
Absolutely. The disaster also highlighted the need to manage something called uplift pressure.
Uplift pressure.
Uplift pressure,
Okay.
water pushing up from beneath the dam can compromise its stability.
Oh. How is uplift pressure addressed in modern dam design?
Well, today we have a number of techniques to mitigate uplift pressure.
Oh.
One common method is to install drainage systems within the dam structure to relieve that pressure. Another technique is to use a wider base or key the dam into the bedrock to increase resistance to uplift forces.
Okay.
These techniques, along with advancements in concrete technology, make dams considerably safer than they were in Mulholland's time.
That's fascinating. So while tragic, the St. Francis Dam disaster prompted some significant improvements in dam engineering.
Yeah.
But the documentary also touches upon something else, the water wars between Los Angeles and the Owens Valley.
Right.
It raises questions about the ethics of diverting water resources.
You're right. The St. Francis Dam disaster isn't just an engineering failure. It's also a story about our relationship with water, especially in a region prone to drought.
Right.
The documentary reminds us that securing water resources for a growing population often comes with unintended consequences.
It makes you think about the delicate balance between meeting our needs and respecting the environment.
Indeed. And as we look toward the future with climate change and growing populations straining water resources globally, the ethical considerations surrounding water management become even more critical.
That brings us to a question for you, our listener. As we navigate the complexities of water management in the 21st century, what are your thoughts on balancing the needs of cities with the environmental impact?
It's a complex issue with no easy answers. But the St. Francis Dam stands as a stark reminder that when we fail to consider the potential consequences of our actions, particularly when it comes to large-scale infrastructure projects, the results can be devastating. It's a lesson we can't afford to forget.
And on that note, the documentary raises another crucial point, the importance of questioning assumptions, even when dealing with seasoned experts.
That's a valuable takeaway. Mulholland's reputation earned through his previous successes may have stifled dissenting voices.
Right.
It highlights the importance of open dialogue, especially when lives are at stake. No one, regardless of their experience, is infallible.
And that makes me think about Mulholland's quote, "If there is any error in human judgment, I was the human."
It's a haunting statement. It speaks to the immense responsibility that comes with engineering, especially when dealing with projects that have such a profound impact on people's lives. It's a responsibility that we as a society share. We need to ensure that the lessons learned from past failures, like the St. Francis Dam disaster, are carried forward into the future.
Yeah, it's incredible how one event can have such a ripple effect, not just on engineering practices, but on the way we think about our relationship with nature.
Yeah, for sure. I think the St. Francis Dam disaster really forced a reevaluation of priorities.
Hmm.
It was no longer just about conquering nature, but about understanding its complexities and respecting its limits.
And you can't talk about this disaster without considering William Mulholland's legacy.
Of course, it's fascinating how his story kind of embodies that shift in thinking.
Right.
He went from being hailed as a hero who tamed the desert to a tragic figure whose ambition ultimately led to immense suffering.
It's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds are fallible, and their mistakes can have devastating consequences.
It is, and that's a lesson that extends beyond engineering.
Right.
It applies to any field where human decisions impact the lives of others.
For sure.
We need to encourage a culture of questioning, of challenging assumptions, even when dealing with respected authorities.
Thinking back to the water wars, it seems like the St. Francis Dam disaster also highlighted the social and political complexities of water management.
Absolutely. The documentary does a good job of portraying the tensions that arose from diverting water from the Owens Valley to fuel Los Angeles's growth. It raises questions about water rights, environmental justice, and the long-term sustainability of such large-scale water transfer projects.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the interconnectedness of things. How decisions made in one place can have ripple effects far beyond.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that water is a shared resource, and its management requires careful consideration of the needs of all stakeholders.
So for our listener who's now absorbed all this information about the St. Francis Dam disaster, what's the one key takeaway? What should they remember long after this episode ends?
I think it comes back to that idea we discussed earlier. Progress without responsibility is a recipe for disaster. Whether we're talking about building dams or managing water resources more broadly, we have an obligation to think critically about the potential consequences of our actions.
Well said. And on that note, I want to leave our listener with a final thought to ponder. As we face the challenges of climate change, growing populations, and increasing water scarcity, what lessons can we draw from the St. Francis Dam disaster to ensure a more sustainable and equitable water future for all?
That's a crucial question and one that deserves our careful attention.
Well, thank you for joining us on the Watershed Moment for this deep dive into the St. Francis Dam disaster.
We hope you found it insightful.
Until next time, keep exploring the fascinating world of water resources engineering.